Welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to walk through a complex and deeply human story, the origins and timeline of the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. To understand what is happening now, we have to rewind the clock, not just by a few years, but by centuries. This is not just a story of politics and armies, it is a story of identity, family, and shared history that turned tragic. The story begins in the medieval era with a state called Kievan Rus. This was a powerful Eastern Slavic kingdom centered on the city of Kiev, which is the modern capital of Ukraine. Both Russia and Ukraine trace their cultural and religious roots directly back to this place. For a long time, the official narrative, especially in Russia, was that these were one single people, branches of the same tree, with Moscow as the natural successor and center of their shared civilization. However, over centuries, the lands of modern Ukraine were divided and ruled by different empires, most notably the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and the Russian Tsardom. The Ukrainian language and a distinct sense of national identity, separate from Russia, grew stronger in the western parts of the country, while the east was more integrated into the Russian Empire. This created a deep, internal cultural division within Ukraine itself, a fault line that would prove to be explosive centuries later. Even the name Ukraine carries meaning. It translates to borderland, a territory at the edge of empires, which shaped its entire historical experience of being a meeting point and a battleground for different worlds. Jumping forward to the 20th century, the relationship between Ukraine and Russia was fundamentally defined by the Soviet Union. After the Russian Revolution, Ukraine became one of the founding republics of the Soviet state. This period is critical to understanding the depth of the pain in this relationship, because it was during this time that one of the darkest chapters occurred. In the early 1930s, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin's policies of forced collectivization of agriculture caused a catastrophic, man-made famine across the Soviet grain-growing regions. Ukraine, being the breadbasket of the Soviet Union, was hit the hardest. This event is called the Holodomor, which literally means death by hunger. Millions of Ukrainians starved to death. For many Ukrainians and historians, this was not an accident of policy. They view it as a deliberate act of genocide aimed at crushing the Ukrainian national spirit and the independent-minded peasantry who resisted the forced seizure of their land and grain. The Soviet regime suppressed this history for decades. While people across the Soviet Union suffered enormously under Stalin, the Holodomor holds a specific, traumatic place in the Ukrainian national memory. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, Ukraine voted overwhelmingly for independence, finally becoming a sovereign state. Yet, the immediate post-Soviet years were chaotic and harsh. Economic collapse and corruption created a sense of nostalgia in some segments of the population for the old, stable order. This shared but painfully divergent memory of the past, where one side sees a common victory and the other sees a colonial occupation and a genocide, set the stage for the future rupture. After declaring independence in 1991, a new and independent Ukraine faced a fundamental identity crisis. The country was, and still is, a complex mosaic. The western regions were largely Ukrainian-speaking, with a strong sense of national identity that looked toward Europe and the West for integration. The eastern and southern regions were largely Russian-speaking, with closer economic, cultural, and familial ties to Russia. This created a political reality best described as two vectors pulling the country in opposite directions. For the first 2 decades, Ukraine tried to walk a tightrope, maintaining a relationship with Russia while also building bridges with the European Union and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO. Russia, under its new leadership, never truly accepted Ukraine as a fully separate nation. It viewed the country as a vital part of its historical sphere of influence, a buffer zone essential for its own security against the expanding NATO alliance. The idea that Ukraine might one day join NATO was viewed by the Kremlin as an absolute red line, an existential threat. This tension simmered beneath the surface, mixed with deep economic and energy dependence. All of this came to a head in two explosive moments that would redraw the map of the 21st century: the Orange Revolution in 2004, where mass protests overturned a fraudulent presidential election and installed a pro-Western candidate, and then, a decade later, the Euromaidan Revolution. The deep state of corruption and the failure of any leader to solve this internal two-vector problem meant the country was a powder keg, waiting for a spark that would ignite a much wider fire. That spark came in late 2013. The pro-Russian president, Viktor Yanukovych, was about to sign a major trade and political agreement with the European Union. For years, this had been a primary goal for the pro-European segment of the population. Then, at the last minute, under immense pressure from Moscow, Yanukovych abruptly backed out of the deal and pivoted back toward Russia. For many Ukrainians, especially the younger generation, this was a final betrayal. They saw it as their president selling out the country's future for short-term Russian bribes and his own corrupt interests. That night, a journalist named Mustafa Naim posted a call on social media for people to gather in the central square of Kiev, Maidan Nezalezhnosti, the Square of Independence. What started as a small student protest grew into a massive, months-long occupation of the square. The movement was named Euromaidan, a combination of Euro and Maidan. It became a city within a city, a festival of civil society and resistance against deep-seated corruption. People of all ages built barricades, organized kitchens and medical centers, and endured the freezing Ukrainian winter. The protests turned deadly in February 2014, when government snipers opened fire on the demonstrators, killing over 100 people. The violence shattered any possibility of compromise. President Yanukovych lost all legitimacy in the eyes of the people and his own security forces. On February 22, he fled Kiev for Russia. The government collapsed overnight. Ukraine was suddenly left with a power vacuum, a nation in mourning for its heroes, and a furious neighbor to the north that viewed this entire, organic popular uprising not as a revolution, but as an illegal coup orchestrated by the West. In the immediate chaos following the revolution in Kiev, a series of mysterious events began unfolding on the Crimean Peninsula. Crimea is a strategically critical piece of land jutting into the Black Sea, home to Russia's Sevastopol naval base and a majority ethnic Russian population. At the end of February 2014, unmarked soldiers in green uniforms and carrying modern Russian military equipment began seizing key sites. They took control of the Crimean Parliament building and airports. These men were nicknamed the Little Green Men. They moved with remarkable professionalism and discipline, but wore no insignia, a silent, anonymous military force. Officially, Russia denied they were its soldiers, initially claiming they were local self-defense forces who bought their modern uniforms from a shop. This was a masterful use of hybrid warfare and plausible deniability. These soldiers surrounded Ukrainian military bases, blockading the troops inside and preventing any meaningful response. A hastily organized local referendum was held, widely condemned as illegal under Ukrainian and international law, where Crimeans voted to join the Russian Federation. Results claimed an overwhelming desire to secede from Ukraine. On March 18, Russia formally annexed the peninsula. For Ukrainians, it was a deep psychological shock, the first time since the Second World War that a European nation had forcibly annexed a part of another sovereign state's territory. For the West, it was a sharp wake-up call. Sanctions were imposed, but the response was hesitant. Russia had shown a new generation how a modern war could begin, quietly, deniably, and with the targets frozen in confusion before the first real shot was fired. The next phase of the conflict immediately flared up in the Donbas region, Ukraine's industrial heartland in the east. Russian intelligence operatives, led by a former officer named Igor Girkin, crossed the border and helped orchestrate the seizure of government buildings in the cities of Donetsk and Luhansk. They declared the creation of two new people's republics, sovereign states that no other country in the world recognized. The same pattern of local actors directed and supplied by Moscow played out again, but this time it was not a silent seizure. It exploded into a full-scale proxy war. The Ukrainian army in 2014 was completely unprepared. It was poorly equipped, disorganized, and suffered from corruption. In the early months, the Russian-backed separatist forces made major gains, shooting down Ukrainian aircraft and capturing long stretches of the border with Russia. Thousands of Russian nationals, including active-duty soldiers on summer holidays, volunteers, and mercenaries, streamed across the porous border with tanks, armored vehicles, and advanced anti-aircraft systems. The war descended into a brutal, grinding artillery duel across a flat, densely populated landscape. Cities like Donetsk Airport became modern-day Stalingrads, fought over for months and reduced to concrete dust. The defining moment of this phase was the Battle of Ilovaisk, where Ukrainian volunteer battalions were surrounded and decimated while trying to retreat through a humanitarian corridor they had negotiated with the Russians. The Ukrainian force lost hundreds of men in a single day, a devastating lesson in the ruthlessness of the new conflict and the fallacy of trusting any agreement made on the battlefield. As the separatist advance stalled, the front lines hardened, creating a frozen conflict that looked like the trenches of the First World War. It was during this brutal summer of 2014 that the conflict shattered the bubble of global indifference in the most tragic way imaginable. On July 17, Malaysia Airlines Flight 17, a passenger jet traveling from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur, was flying over the conflict zone at 33,000 feet. A surface-to-air missile system, specifically a Russian-made Buk, was fired from separatist-controlled territory. The missile hit the plane, tearing it apart in the sky. All 298 innocent civilians on board were killed, their bodies and belongings scattered across the sunflower fields of eastern Ukraine. The world was horrified. An international investigation later concluded that the Buk missile system was brought in from Russia's 53rd Anti-Aircraft Missile Brigade and returned there the same night. Russia denied any involvement and put forward a series of alternative theories, blaming Ukraine, a narrative that shifted many times. This tragedy became a powerful symbol of the uncontrollable consequences of modern hybrid conflict. It transformed the war from a distant regional dispute into a global atrocity. Despite this, the war on the ground continued. Two major ceasefire agreements, known as the Minsk Protocols, were signed, aiming to stop the fighting and reintegrate the rebel regions into Ukraine with special status. However, the agreements were fundamentally contradictory, interpreted differently by each side, and the killing never really stopped. For 8 long years, a low-intensity trench war claimed a steady weekly toll of lives, with the world slowly looking away, accepting it as a new normal. By late 2021, the world began to notice something terrifying on satellite imagery. Russia was slowly and methodically building the largest military force seen in Europe since the end of the Cold War. Divisions of troops, tanks, ballistic missiles, and field hospitals were forming a giant iron fist on 3 sides of Ukraine, from Russia itself, from annexed Crimea, and from Belarus to the north. As the buildup accelerated, the Kremlin issued a set of extreme security demands to the United States and NATO. The central demand was a legally binding guarantee that Ukraine would never join NATO and that the alliance would roll back its forces to their 1997 positions, essentially dismantling the Eastern European security architecture built over 3 decades. Diplomatic efforts went into overdrive. French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz shuttled between Moscow and Washington. President Putin sat across an absurdly long white table from the German Chancellor, their body language cold and distant. The United States, in an unprecedented move of declassification of intelligence, began publishing real-time warnings about Russian plans. They released precise details of potential false flag operations Russia would stage to justify an invasion, including a fabricated video of a Ukrainian attack. Most of the world, including many Ukrainians themselves, found it hard to believe a full-scale invasion would happen. It seemed like a massive bluff, a psychological operation, or a military maneuver that was too irrational to actually execute. But for the soldiers in the trenches of the Donbas and the intelligence agencies reading the raw data, the signs were undeniable. The final week of peace was filled with a strange, tense normalcy in Kiev, a collective holding of breath, knowing a storm was on the horizon. The breath was released in the early hours of February 24, 2022. A few minutes before 5 in the morning, a dark, echoing speech by Vladimir Putin was broadcast, announcing a special military operation. His stated goal was the demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine, a narrative filled with historical revisionism. Before the speech even finished, explosions thundered across Ukraine. Cruise missiles struck air bases, radar stations, and ammunition depots from Lviv in the west to Kharkiv in the east, in a shocking wave of coordinated strikes designed to paralyze the Ukrainian military command. Russian tanks and mechanized infantry columns began rolling across the border from 3 directions, aiming for a lightning decapitation strike on the capital, Kiev. The world expected Kiev to fall in 3 days. Russian airborne forces captured Hostomel Airport, a crucial cargo hub just outside the city, in a dramatic helicopter assault, aiming to create an air bridge to bring in thousands of troops directly into the suburbs. However, something extraordinary happened. A combination of fierce Ukrainian resistance, led by a president who famously refused offers to evacuate with the line "I need ammunition, not a ride," turned the tide. The 40-mile-long Russian armored convoy, intended to storm the government quarter, became stuck in the mud and swampy forests north of the city. It was systematically destroyed by Ukrainian artillery and nimble units using anti-tank weapons. Logistics collapsed, morale among the young Russian conscripts plummeted, and the plan for a quick victory disintegrated. Within a month, Russia admitted defeat on the Kiev front and withdrew its forces entirely, leaving behind a landscape of burned tanks and evidence of appalling civilian massacres in the suburbs they had occupied. With the failure to take Kiev, the war shifted to a grinding and brutally destructive new phase in the east and south, resembling the First World War but fought with drones and satellites. Russia refocused its objective to capturing the entire Donbas region and holding a land bridge to Crimea. The war became a horrific artillery duel, pulverizing cities like Mariupol, which was besieged for months until its defenders in the Azovstal steel plant surrendered. The destruction was total. The war also unlocked a new front of global proxy warfare, with the West pouring unprecedented billions of dollars in sophisticated weaponry into Ukraine, from howitzers to eventually main battle tanks and missile systems, transforming the country's military into one of the most battle-hardened and capable forces on Earth. This is no longer a regional conflict, it is a long-term confrontation that has remade global alliances, triggered energy and food crises, and shattered the post-Cold War security order. It is a war without a clear end, where Ukrainian cities face relentless drone strikes from Iranian-designed weapons, and the battlefield sees the real-time integration of artificial intelligence. The human toll is a deep, festering wound, tens of thousands of soldiers lost, millions of civilians displaced, and entire generations traumatized. This is a story that began with the shared roots of Chivan Rus and has now evolved into a defining schism of the 21st century, a brutal reminder that history is never just a thing of the past, but a live, active force with the power to redraw borders and reshape the lives of millions in the most violent way possible. Thank you for watching this deep dive. If you want to see more long-form narratives like this, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments below. Take care.